I want to thank the music team and Gloria and I for reading. We're continuing today with our January series, Out with the Old, In with the True. And today we're focusing more on the In with the True portion. Our topic for today is Listen with your heart. You might remember that last week we talked about how big is your container. And I was just curious if anybody has figured out how to exchange some of that sand for maybe pebbles and rocks. And if not, just keep working on it. Meanwhile, this week we're focusing on listening actively, listening with your heart, asking yourself, can you hear the divine whispering to you? Are you actively listening to someone or waiting to speak? And do you listen even to those who might have fallen through the cracks? Or at least you think they have. They have a totally opposite viewpoint than yours. So here's the question for the week. What's the one choice that you can make today so that you learn to actively listen to others and to what the divine is whispering to your heart? One more time. What's that one choice that you can make today so that you learn to actively listen to others and to what the divine is whispering to your heart? The divine whispers. Are you listening? Last week we talked about receiving from the divine, and the truth is that we're always in constant communication with our Creator through the one life that is God, that is our life now. And as we cultivate our ability to listen, we open to the infinite good of life. I know I want to be open to the infinite good of life. Active listening is a spiritual art, practiced with our heart and with our whole being. God speaks to us through everything, through nature, through our relationships, through art, through our work, through all of our daily activities, even through our challenges. And I realized this past week as I looked out the window with the leaves slightly moving and the sun was shining brightly, that I miss a lot of messages from the divine in that moment of being too busy to go into that inward silence. And active communication with our Creator flows both ways. We talked last week about how big was our container, but it doesn't mean anything to have a huge container if you have no way to fill it up. And the way we fill up our containers is to be listening for those opportunities. One of the greatest gifts we can give each other is to actually active listen to each other, free from projections and free from disapproval and from our judgment, from interruptions, merely intuitively being right there, present, merely listening actively for the presence of God in each person that we're listening to. We're always in communication with Spirit because God lives through us, as us, and we live in the divine. Spirit actually knows itself more fully through its creation. And we intuitively know our oneness with Source. Have you ever watched a child? They know when to trust and when to keep a distance. We seem to lose a bit of that intuition as we get older and we listen to people who tell us, oh, that's just your imagination, it's not the truth. But if we think back at one point or another in our lives, I think we've all had that deep sense of knowing beyond what our five senses reveal to us. I know I have. And sometimes we brush it off as nothing or not worth listening to. But know this, God, our source, speaks to us through our inner knowing that requires us to find a way of listening without our ears and to feel its powerful presence. What's ours to do is to be open and present. Sometimes we talk at God, asking through our prayers. In moments of forgetting, we might actually be beseeching. But how many of us really talk to God, to that presence within us that already knows only what is true. Ernest Holmes in Can We Talk to God wrote this: "We all know we can talk at God, but it's a different proposition to consider whether we can talk to God." I'm considering the topic from the standpoint of communication. Unless we are conscious that we are talking to God, and God is conscious of being talked to, we certainly cannot communicate with God. There can be no real communication without a reciprocity of ideas. I don't know about you, but I certainly desire real communication with the divine. And it takes time to realize we're communicating. We have to slow down, take some breaths, let go of the outside world, and then we can be receptive to whatever shows up. So God sometimes speaks to us through our mentors, through our friends, through those whose ideas are very much opposed to ours. We only hear the message when we're actively listening. And that's a way of participating and being in service to the whole of life. It's the way energy flows back and forth between us to allow for open communication. Ken Nebern, in his book, Make Me an Instrument of Your Peace, wrote this story about a friend of his who was an actor. Here's what he had to say. He had been a long-time student of the craft, someone who, with the movement of a hand or the sublist of modulation of a voice, could create an entire world of meaning in a scene or a character. On one occasion, he and I were sitting together discussing an issue about which I thought I had some deep insight. I was going on at great length about my thinking on the matter when suddenly I lost my train of thought. I looked over at him sheepishly. "I forgot what I was saying," I said. "I know," he answered. "It's because I wasn't listening." When we are not paying attention to what someone has to say, it's a one-way communication. And there's nothing to be gained from that, really. But I think the good news is that God is always listening. And I know I don't want to be going on and then lose my train of thought. Okay, some Sundays you might think I do that. Sorry about that. And that reminds me of some words from The Science of Mind that Ernest Holmes wrote. "The universe holds nothing against us. No matter how many mistakes we have made, we are still perfect beings within. And the within may become the without if we will carefully train ourselves to listen to the inner voice of truth, which speaks to us in our moments of quietness and solitude." Do you think you owe it to yourself to find some moments of quietness and solitude so as to listen to that inner voice of truth which is speaking to you? If your life is too busy to listen to the divine, what does that tell you? When we truly listen with our whole heart and the entire fabric of our being, we're listening to the resonance of God that connects all life to that divine whole. This past week, we watched the changing of the guards with respect to our presidency. Whether you're a Biden supporter or not, I hope you were listening to the resonance of God that came through in Biden's inaugural speech. He said this: "Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America requires so much more than words and requires the most elusive of all things in our democracy: unity. Without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. Hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Our president was urging Americans to be better than divisiveness. And this requires us to remember our unity, to remember we are all one, and to listen with the entire fabric of our being to what is happening around us, and even to those people who have very opposing views than ours. Lynn Harley, who's an independent educator in the wilds of the Yukon, tells a story about two skiers who were crossing a frozen lake at night. They came upon a moose that had fallen through the ice, and it was an enormous creature stuck shoulder high. It was clear the moose couldn't get out by itself, and it was also clear that they couldn't, just the two of them, pull it out. The temperature was dropping. So they stayed the night, and even though the moose resisted, they covered it with their tent and settled in. All night long, they shone their lights on the face of the moose and on the edges of the broken ice, so that it was to keep the ice from freezing into charge that would actually cut the moose. And in the morning, when the sun appeared, they went for help. And with the help, they were able to rope the moose and slowly pull it to the edge where it could find its own way out. The skiers in this story had huge hearts. They stopped their journey to help out a moose in need. And they did it with compassion, being patient until the time was right. This is a powerful metaphor for how to listen to and be with those who have fallen in some fashion, whether they be seeking help or not. You might be saying, well, what is the metaphor? Well, listening and observing is often the best first step. And then stay close and keep them warm. In other words, like the skiers, sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen and watch to see what the needs of that person is, giving them a safe place to feel warm and cared about. A listening ear to see what they might see as their challenge or their problem. And like the moose, sometimes the person might be wary or even resistant of your comfort. Be gentle and give the comfort anyway. Allow them to know that they are in a safe place. Okay, so the second thing is resist the urge to prematurely solve the situation. Advice is not what people really are seeking. And let me tell you, Dear Abby rarely works. Not only that, you can end up being the bad guy if the solution you suggest turns out to have ramifications. So just notice what needs to be done. As the skiers did, they just sat there, shined their lights on the charge of ice to keep them at bay. You can shine your light on someone and help them keep the problem at bay so that it's far enough away that they can get some perspective and actually come up with a solution. You help them bring about a solution. And if nothing can be done, just sit with them and resist the urge to abandon them because they're stuck. It would have been really easy for the skiers to just say, we really can't help that moose, but we're on a journey, let's just keep going. Be a light in the darkness, like the skiers were to the moose. It's really easy to abandon people when they complain about their circumstances. And if you listen with your heart, what we find out is that they are needing to feel safe. They're needing to see that the situation is something that can change. So offer them your tent. Offer them your place of safety till the way out presents itself, not forcing a rescue. The skier stayed until a solution was possible. When we listen with our heart and recognize we're all one, we see a situation and we can wait for the right time to implement a solution when everyone benefits. If the skiers had tried to rescue the moose immediately, can you imagine what might have happened? The moose and the skiers might have all ended up in the ice, or they could have all been injured because the time wasn't right. Sometimes listening with the heart means to have the patience to wait for the miracle to happen, because it will. So why might you want to listen to this? Life is long enough that we each have our not knowing what to do moment. We're each going to need comfort at some point along the way and a solution that leads us to a place where we can continue on our way. So if we learn the skill of listening with our heart, it lets us love and meet truth like small lights on the ice. In the truth of each other, there is always a way out. Mark Nepo wrote this beautiful book called 7,000 Ways to Listen. And he talked about this concept of deep listening, which is a form of active listening with your heart. He describes it in such an eloquent manner that I'm just going to read his description of deep listening. We listen deeply by listening to the source through immersion, absorption, and presence. The way Beethoven listened to the supreme silence of his deafness and the music of the spheres cascaded through as the Ninth Symphony. The way Einstein kept things in motion long enough to hear the whispers of relativity. The way the clairvoyant listens to the currents that run beneath the living and the dead, unsure of the signs they receive. The way the heart can feel the ache of another halfway around the world, unsure which brings such sadness. The way I knew my grandmother at 94 was waiting for me to come so she could die. How might you practice listening deeply? We can always begin by allowing ourselves to sink into the depth of whatever moment we are in, for depth is ever present. We don't have to travel to find depth. We simply have to relax our minds into the ground of where we are, the way roots unravel in the earth after a long soaking rain. That passage about relaxing our minds into the ground of where we are, the way roots unravel in the earth after a long soaking rain, really reminds me of the roots and wings concept. We are creating deep roots so that we can have those wings that allow us to fly and be all that we can be. I've been practicing the spiritual art of listening for years and continue to notice that I have a ways to go. I guess that is why they call it a practice. How about you? Are you interested in learning deep listening and being able to sink into the depth of whatever moment you're in? We read in the Bible how Jesus spent a lot of time in the silence. He would actually take time from the crowds and from his disciples and find a quiet place to be able to hear what the divine was whispering. Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind wrote this about Jesus. To this remarkable man, out of silence of his own soul, came a direct revelation of his sonship, his oneness with God. Back of the conflict of ideas back of the den of eternal life and action, back in innermost recesses of uplifted thought and silent contemplation, there is a voice ever proclaiming, "This is my beloved Son." And Holmes goes on to say, seldom does this voice penetrate the outer world of human experience. Seldom does anyone allow it to perfectly express through him. We must learn to listen for this voice, call it conscious, intuition, or what we will. It is there. No man need go unguided through life, for all are divine at the center, and all are images of the Most High. Let us each decide this week to be guided through life from our divine center, to practice deeply listening to the source through immersion, absorption, and presence, so as to create a world in which each of us might be the light that shines on the shards of ice and frees others from their entrapment and frees ourselves from our own entrapments. So let me summarize for you. The divine is whispering. Are you listening? Are you finding a way to listen without your ears and to feel the divine's powerful presence? Are you listening actively, finding some moments of quietness and solitude so you can listen to that voice of truth that speaks to you? Are you listening with your whole heart, even to those people that you think have fallen through the cracks? Listen to our President's pleas. Without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness. Let's be better than divisiveness. Be guided through life from our divine center. Remember the story of the moose and stay close. Resist the urge to solve. Just listen. Resist abandoning people when they continue to complain and complain. And stay until a solution presents itself. Have the patience to wait for that miracle of the divine to happen. And can you learn to listen deeply, to relax your mind into that ground of where you are, the way roots unravel in the earth after a long soaking rain? So I have a challenge for you this week. Do one thing each day that increases your ability to listen with your heart. And you might want to use this affirmation. How is it that I so easily and willingly choose today to actively listen to others and to what the divine is whispering to my heart? So let's pray. Just taking some deep, nourishing breaths, breathing all the way up to that center of your heart, and releasing it. Breathing in again, letting go of any judgment you have of yourself, of others, and just listening to what the divine has to say. That God that is love and joy and peace and safety and freedom and ease and grace is exactly who you are. Each of us have all of those qualities of the divine right within us. And what I know to be the truth is that this week we are learning to actively listen, not only to the messages in our heart, but also to what is behind what other people are saying. What is the real truth? We're learning to dig our feet into the ground and listen deeply. We're knowing that unity is what's important, not divisiveness. So I'm grateful I am grateful for this community. I am grateful for this philosophy, which is non-judgmental, allows us to make mistakes and realize that it's not really a big deal. It's just part of being human. And I'm grateful to know that the God without lives within me and within every person on this planet. So it's from all that gratitude that I just release these words into the law of mind, spirit, and action, because I do know the truth, that the divine has already called all of this good. So I can just say amen, and we can affirm it together. And so it is.